I'm Lauren Pierce, 33, and tonight I'm carrying 3 gift bags up the same cracked walkway where I learned to ride a bike trying to ignore the sour smell of cigarette smoke seeping from the screen door. Each step tightening my chest like a belt hole too far. I'm telling myself this visit will be simple. The porch light hums the geraniums my mother babies along the railings are blooming like little red stop signs, and I keep my eyes on the door because if I look at the living room window, I'll see my father's chair in the same corner, the same posture, the same judgment. In one bag is a winter work coat I picked out after reading reviews at midnight. In another, the ceramic pans Mom once admired. In the third, a watch for my brother that matches the one he said looked too nice for me. I'm a senior manager now at the Harbor Crest Hotel with a boardroom presentation to investors in the morning and a brand new laptop waiting in my car like a heartbeat. I came to share good news, to make a small bridge out of useful things, to show that what I do isn't showing off, it's work. The doorknob is cold against my palm, colder than spring air should be. Beyond it is the family I love in a way that still startles me for its stubbornness. Beyond it is the familiar voice that can turn any celebration into a test. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand tall when someone tried to shrink you, tap like and subscribe, so this story finds the people who need it. I grew up in a town that learned to bend around the mill's whistle, where shift changes decided traffic and holidays, and where we were taught to keep our heads down, pay what we owed, and help a neighbor shovel a driveway when the plows took too long. My mother, Diane, kept a box of recipe cards and a jar for spare change, and she saved the birthday bows to iron flat for next year. My father, Frank, kept his boots by the back door, and his pride wound tight around anything that could not be held in a calloused fist. We said grace, we returned casseroles with thank you notes, and if someone was sick, we raked their leaves without being asked. Kindness and thrift were our language, the kind that doesn't make a sound until you need it. When I left for college, I carried that language into classrooms and internships, and later into lobbies with polished floors, where guests noticed when a bellman's name tag gleamed and a welcome felt sincere. The hotel world I entered runs on different clocks. Instead of a siren at dawn, there are check-ins and banquets and the quiet choreography of housekeeping carts gliding down carpeted halls. Budgets speak in line items and timelines, not in overtime slips and season layoffs. At Harbor Crest, the ocean throws light through the windows in late afternoon, and the guests take pictures of the staircase because someone a century ago chose the perfect curve for a new bride's hand. I learned that hospitality isn't pretending, it's anticipating a need before it's voiced, it's dignity, it's order. When the director Nathan Cole told me the board wanted a renovation plan that preserved history without bleeding cash, I thought of my mother polishing the dining table of my father, repairing the same lawnmower every spring, of how to make something last without making it small. I wrote a proposal that favored craftsmanship over flash salvaging original doors, choosing local stone, repurposing storage into revenue. When the promotion came through, my team clapped and I cried in the bathroom where no one could see. Coming home with that news was supposed to be simple. I parked by the curb under the same street light that used to flicker and stepped into a living room that had barely changed. Same recliner, same plaid throw, same dent in the carpet where the coffee table sits. Tyler wandered in from the kitchen with a beer and a grin that looked like it wanted to be a joke. Mom wiped her hands on a towel and reached for the bag with the pans, her thank you drifting off before it found my eyes. Dad looked at my pressed slacks at the badge I forgot to take off and smirked in a way I felt in my stomach more than I heard. I set the coat on his lap and explained the insulation rating, because that's a language we share, and I told them about the investor meeting, about the deck I built slide by slide on a brand new laptop I bought with my first promotion advance. The words came out careful and tidy, the way I present to a room that needs a steady hand. It should have been enough. Their house carries its own weather. You can walk into it with sunshine on your shoulders and watch the temperature fall 3 degrees. At the first sarcastic manager, the first laugh at a polyester blend, the first time someone pretends your stability is arrogance. I kept my voice even because that is what I know how to do, and I put my hand on my laptop bag the way you touch a railing on a narrow stair for balance more than protection. I wanted to show them 2 slides that proved the numbers not to win an argument, just to let them see what I see when I talk about preservation and return. Mom stood by the doorway holding the box like it might break. Tyler set the watch on the table and raised his eyebrows at me as if to say we were playing a game I didn't remember agreeing to. Dad's jaw moved a muscle I know as well as the crack in the porch step, and the room's air shifted like a draft you can't quite find. I have always believed that if I brought enough proof, if I wrapped good intentions in practical gifts and patient explanations, the old ruts would smooth and we could drive over them without feeling the bump. That night, with my presentation an arm's length away and tomorrow's meeting already lining up in my mind, I tried again to build a bridge out of facts and usefulness. I told them I'd been promoted to senior manager, that my team trusted me, that the hotel wanted to invest because I had done my homework. I said it simply the way I'd say it to a stranger at the front desk who deserved the truth. The living room TV murmured, the clock ticked. My father rose from his chair without a word and stepped between me and the door, and his hand hovered near the strap of my bag as if testing the weight of what I'd brought into his house. My father's voice had that weight I remembered from childhood, the kind that silenced a room before he even spoke. He stepped closer, the smell of smoke and metal clinging to his jacket. "You think you can just walk in here after months, hand out presents, and act like you're better than us?" His tone wasn't loud yet, but it carried enough threat to make my mother still in the doorway. I tightened my grip on the strap of my laptop bag, trying to steady my breath. "Dad, I'm not trying to be better. I just wanted to share something important." My words sounded calm, but my heartbeat felt like footsteps behind me in a dark hallway. Tyler leaned against the kitchen doorway, the light catching his grin. "Rich folks got her thinking she's somebody," he said, his voice thick with beer. The air grew heavier, pressed tight with things we'd all said before in different ways. I glanced at my mother, hoping for a softening, some flicker of support, but she just turned the cookware box in her hands, reading the label like it mattered. "Please," I said quietly, "I need to finish preparing for tomorrow. It's a big presentation and people are counting on me." My father laughed, a short, hard sound. "People are counting on me too. Real people. At the mill." Before I could respond, he reached for the bag hanging from my shoulder. The strap slid through my fingers before I realized what was happening. "Dad, wait." His calloused hands closed around the laptop, and for a moment time froze. His expression changed, the anger no longer masked, just raw and determined. "You need to learn your place," he said. Then with one sharp motion he raised it and slammed it to the floor. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Metal bent plastic split. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of light and dust. I dropped to my knees, staring at the pieces scattered across the carpet. "Why would you do that?" My voice shook but didn't rise. I could already feel the burn behind my eyes, that familiar mix of disbelief and shame. Tyler smirked. "Guess now you'll find out what real work feels like." For a moment, I couldn't move. I kept thinking of the files stored on that drive, the weeks of late nights, the numbers and slides that told the story I had to present. The hotel's investment depended on it, and so did my credibility. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth but said nothing. "It's just a computer," my father muttered. "You act like it's your whole life." I looked up at him then, and what I saw wasn't rage anymore. It was fear. He looked older than his 59 years. The deep creases in his face darkened by the porch light coming through the blinds. But fear didn't excuse this. It never had. A sound left me half exhale, half instinct, and I reached for my phone. His brows knit in confusion as I began taking photos, the bent casing, the cracked glass, the way his boot toe brushed against the keyboard. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice uncertain now. I didn't answer. I took another photo, then pulled the receipt from my wallet and laid it beside the damage. Each click felt like a boundary snapping into place. When I finished, I slipped my phone back into my purse and met his eyes. "Lauren," he said, softer now, almost reasonable. "You're getting too deep into that world. You're going to get hurt when it falls apart. I'm trying to save you from that." I stared at him, trying to understand the logic behind his destruction. "Save me," I asked quietly. "By wrecking the one thing that could change everything for me." Tyler shifted his weight, glancing at our father. "They're bringing in machines at the mill," he said under his breath. "We could lose everything." The confession landed heavy. For a heartbeat, I saw them both differently, not just as the people who hurt me, but as men terrified of being replaced, of losing purpose in a world that moved on without asking their permission. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father just wants what's best for all of us." I gathered the broken pieces, setting them carefully into my bag, as if handling something alive. "It's not about what's best," I said, standing. "It's about respect." I looked around the room that once felt like home, the worn sofa, the TV humming in the corner, the smell of grease and old curtains, and realized nothing here would ever change. When I walked out into the night, the cool air hit me like water after a long fever. My car sat under the streetlight, the laptop's weight in my bag strangely comforting, despite its broken shell. I drove without thinking, the route turning familiar only when I saw the porch light glowing at Ruth's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into her arms. The smell of cinnamon and clean linen filled the space between us. Inside, under the soft kitchen light, I laid the pieces of my laptop across her table. She didn't interrupt as I explained what happened, her eyes following every movement of my hands. When I finished, she disappeared into her spare room and returned with a laptop so old it looked like it belonged in a library display. "It's slow," she said, setting it beside mine, "but it still works." I ran my fingers across the keys, feeling the difference in weight and sound. "They can break things." She added, her gaze steady, "but they can't break you." I sat there for a while, the hum of her refrigerator, the only sound between us. Then, almost to myself, I said, "It's not about the computer." She nodded once. "I know." She poured 2 cups of tea, sliding one toward me. "So what's next?" I stared at the cracked screen still on the table. "Tomorrow I'm giving that presentation," I said, "even if I have to rebuild every slide tonight." Ruth smiled, the kind that makes your shoulders unclench without realizing it. "Then let's get started." The clock read nearly 2 when I finally reached the hotel's IT support line. My voice stayed even as I explained the situation, hoping for one small mercy. When they confirmed my files were backed up to the company drive, I nearly laughed from relief. Ruth appeared in the doorway wearing a robe and holding another cup of tea. "Good news," she asked. "Everything's saved," I said. "I can rebuild from any computer." She sat beside me, her hand wrapping around her mug. "You know," she said softly, "your father did this kind of thing to me once. I had a photography scholarship when I was 18. He broke my camera the week before my interview." I looked at her, surprised. "You never told me that." She smiled sadly. "Some stories are heavy to carry until someone else needs to hear them." Her words sat with me as I reopened my files, reformatting slides and checking data links. Each fix felt like reclaiming something that had been taken not just from the laptop, but from years of small thefts, confidence, peace, belief. By dawn, the new version was leaner, sharper, better than before. When the first light reached through the curtains, I finally leaned back, exhausted, but ready. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've got this," she said. I nodded, saving the final draft one more time. The old laptop hummed quietly, its fans spinning against the morning silence. "They can break things," she repeated, "but they can't break your mind." I closed the lid gently, the sound soft but final. The morning outside was pale and still, the kind of quiet that comes right before a storm clears. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever they had tried to destroy, they hadn't succeeded. When I stepped out into the early light, I could see the ocean in the distance, calm and silver. I whispered to no one in particular, "I won't let them take this from me." Then I started the car, heading toward the hotel. Tomorrow would be my chance to prove it. The kitchen clock at Ruth's house ticked through the silence as dawn pushed pale light through the lace curtains. I hadn't slept. My hands still shook from the night before, though the house itself felt like an anchor, warm, safe, real. Ruth poured another cup of coffee and slid it toward me. "You'll get through today," she said simply. I nodded, though my voice wouldn't cooperate. The broken laptop sat on the counter, its cracked screen glinting like frost. Every time I looked at it, the room seemed to tilt. By 7, I had packed Ruth's old laptop into a tote bag, along with my printed notes, and the flash drive I'd managed to salvage. The drive was small, barely the size of a key, but it carried the proof that my work still existed. As I left for the hotel, Ruth called after me. "Remember, you're not there to impress anyone. You're there because you earned it." Her voice followed me all the way to the car. The drive to Harbor Crest usually soothed me. The road wound along the shoreline, and I'd grown used to the rhythm of gulls and waves. That morning, every turn felt sharp, every mile heavy. When I reached the hotel's glass doors, my reflection looked like someone I barely recognized, tired, pale, older somehow. Still, I squared my shoulders, smiled at the concierge, and headed for the elevator. The conference room was already buzzing when I walked in. 6 board members sat around a long oak table, murmuring over coffee. Nathan stood near the projector, his usual calm expression warming when he saw me. "Morning, Lauren. Everything good with your equipment?" His question landed like a test. I met his eyes and set the old laptop on the table. "All good," I said, even though my throat tightened. He nodded, taking me at my word. As the meeting began, I took a slow breath and connected the cables. The machine whirred loudly, its fan protesting every command. A few raised eyebrows circled the table, but I ignored them. "Sometimes the best solutions come from unlikely tools," I said lightly. Nathan's mouth twitched in the faintest smile. The first slide appeared crisp and professional despite the outdated screen. I launched into the numbers, the design concepts, the projected growth for the next 5 years. I could feel the shift in the room as I spoke. Where there had been skepticism, there was now interest. Every line I'd rewritten in Ruth's kitchen the night before came out clearer, more direct. I talked about restoration community partnerships, cost-saving measures that preserved the hotel's history. My voice stayed steady, though my heart raced with every transition. The ancient laptop hummed beside me, the soft sound of its fan filling the pauses between my words. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then one of the senior board members, a man who rarely spoke during presentations, set down his pen. "Ms. Pierce," he said, "this is exactly the kind of proposal we've been waiting for. Balanced, creative, practical." Nathan looked from him to me, then back again. "Agreed," he said. "I think we've found our direction." Relief came in a wave so strong I almost forgot to breathe. My shoulders eased, my hands finally still. Nathan closed his portfolio and smiled. "Lauren, your department will take the lead on the first phase of renovations. Congratulations." I thanked him, my voice barely more than a whisper. As the others gathered their materials, I sat for a moment longer, tracing the edge of the old keyboard. For all its flaws, that laptop had carried me through when everything else tried to stop me. When the meeting ended, I stepped into the hallway, greeted by the scent of fresh coffee and the low murmur of lobby music. Several colleagues who'd heard about the presentation stopped to congratulate me. "Heard you nailed it," one of the front desk managers said with a grin. "Even with that dinosaur of a computer." I laughed, a genuine sound this time. It did the job I told her. Nathan caught up with me by the elevators. "That was outstanding work," he said. "I don't know all the details, but I can tell you handled some kind of storm before walking into that room." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Something like that." He studied me for a moment, then added, "If you need an advance to replace your laptop, just say so. We invest in people who invest in themselves." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. 3 messages from my parents, all variations of the same demand. The bill money was late. The screen blurred for a second as I silenced the phone. "Thank you, Nathan," I said, "but I'll manage." He nodded, respecting the boundary I hadn't spoken aloud. Outside, the sunlight bounced off the hotel's front windows, bright and sharp. Ruth waited near the entrance, holding a bouquet of yellow daisies. She beamed when she saw me. "I knew you'd do it," she said, pulling me into a hug. "They can't break what's meant to stand." I smiled, the tension in my chest finally giving way to something lighter. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my ribs. We walked across the parking lot together, the wind coming off the water cool against my face. Ruth talked about dinner plans, about how I should stay with her until things settled. I didn't argue. The thought of going back to my apartment, of walking past the empty place where my father's approval should have lived, felt too heavy to face alone. That night, over bowls of homemade soup, Ruth helped me lay out my next steps. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, one that tracked every bill, every transfer I'd ever made to my parents. The numbers stretched back years, each line a quiet reminder of how much I'd tried to hold them up. Electricity, water, internet, insurance, even Tyler's car repairs. Ruth watched as I worked her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "You've been carrying a lot, haven't you?" she said. I didn't answer, just added another column labeled, "Stops here." When I finally shut the laptop, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. "It's time to set boundaries," I said softly. Ruth reached across the table, her hand steady on mine. "That's not selfish, Lauren. That's survival." As I prepared for bed in her guest room, my phone buzzed again, another message from home. This time I didn't open it. I turned the phone face down and stared at the ceiling until sleep found me. The next morning would bring new challenges, but I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The old rhythm of fear had cracked, replaced by something firmer. I didn't know if my family would ever understand, but I knew one truth beyond any doubt: I had earned this peace, and I wasn't giving it back. I woke to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of gulls outside. Ruth called from the kitchen. "Your director left a message, said the board's already approved funding for Phase 1. I smiled, realizing that the life I was building finally felt like mine. Still, a part of me knew this calm wouldn't last. My father wasn't the kind of man to let silence stay silent for long. I carried my mug to the window, the sea stretching wide and silver in the morning light. Somewhere beyond it, I imagined the mill gates standing quiet, the smokestacks fading into the sky. For the first time, that thought didn't scare me. It just felt distant, like something I'd already left behind. But families like mine have a way of finding their way back into your world, even when you've closed every door. And soon I would learn that walking away was only the beginning of the fight. I spent the next few nights at Ruth's house, sleeping lightly, half expecting the phone to ring with my father's name flashing across the screen. It never did. Instead, the silence stretched thick and strange, like a rope pulled too tight. Ruth didn't press for details. She made breakfast, handed me her car keys when I needed them, and simply let the quiet fill the spaces where questions might have lived. Each morning I left early for work and came home late, trying to stay ahead of both projects and thoughts I didn't want to unpack. One evening after dinner, Ruth joined me in the living room with 2 mugs of tea and a small notebook in her hand. "You've been holding a lot in," she said gently. I looked up from my laptop, unsure how to answer. She opened the notebook and flipped to a page written in my mother's neat cursive. "She gave me this last Christmas. Said she didn't know what to do with it." The pages were filled with dates, job titles, salary notes, every step of my career written in careful order. My mother had kept a private record of my progress year after year. I ran my finger along the lines, tracing the tiny loops of her handwriting. She was proud, Ruth said, watching my face. She just couldn't show it without paying for it later. The thought sank deep. Somewhere behind her silence and deflection, my mother had been keeping score, not to shame me, but to remember. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. Later that night, as rain tapped the kitchen window, Ruth set another folder in front of me. "Before you go rebuilding everything, you need to understand the pattern." Inside were old photographs and a few yellowed letters. "Your father did the same to me when I was your age," she said quietly. "Broke my camera right before my scholarship interview. Said he was teaching me not to waste my time." She folded her hands, her expression steady but sad. "I saw that same look in his eyes when you told him about your promotion." The memories came back in flashes. The soaked textbooks, the missing application letters, the way my achievements always seemed to come with accidents attached. Until now, I'd never put them together. Sitting across from Ruth, it finally made sense. It wasn't carelessness or bad timing. It was sabotage, small and deliberate, wrapped in concern. "Have you noticed," Ruth asked, leaning forward slightly, "it always happens right before something big?" I nodded, unable to find words. The weight of recognition felt both heavy and freeing. I opened my laptop again, pulling up my presentation files, but my focus shifted. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been taken piece by piece over the years. I worked through the night while Ruth read quietly beside me. The old machine hummed, the keys clacking unevenly as I reorganized slides and refined charts. By dawn, the presentation had a new rhythm, leaner, sharper, stronger. The setbacks I'd written about became examples of adaptation. Every line carried more truth than the version I'd lost. When I finally hit save, the sky was pale gray, and I felt something close to calm. At work that morning, I walked through the hotel's corridors with the confidence that only exhaustion can bring. My team met me with smiles and questions about the project's next phase. Even the lobby felt different, alive with purpose. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but it had somewhere to go. It had shape now, a direction. After lunch, Nathan stopped by my office, a rare, unannounced visit. "I read your updated proposal," he said, taking a seat across from me. "It's even better than the first draft." He paused, studying my face. "You've been through something, haven't you?" I hesitated before answering. "Something," I said softly. He didn't ask for details. "Whatever it was, you turned it into fuel," he said. "That's not easy." His words stayed with me long after he left. That night, Ruth and I sat by her living room window, watching lightning roll far out over the ocean. The storm's glow reflected off the glass, flickering across her shelves of books and framed photos. "He'll come around eventually," she said, meaning my father. "But you can't wait for that to happen before you live your life." I nodded, holding my tea close for warmth. "I'm not waiting," I said. "I'm moving forward." Ruth smiled, small and knowing. "Then that's your real inheritance," she said. Over the next few days, I focused on work. The hotel's board announced funding for the renovation, and my department buzzed with excitement. My presentation circulated among executives, earning quiet praise from people who rarely gave it. Nathan called me into his office one afternoon to discuss timelines and budgets. As we reviewed the numbers, he said, "This project's going to define your career, Lauren." The words landed like a promise. Even with everything improving professionally, home remained a silent fracture. My parents didn't call and I didn't reach out. The distance between us felt both painful and necessary. On the third evening after the board's decision, I sat alone in Ruth's guest room, the glow from my laptop casting pale light across the walls. My inbox held a dozen congratulations from coworkers, but one message stood out. It was from the hotel's IT department confirming my new company laptop was ready for pickup. The timing felt symbolic, like a quiet closing of a chapter. Ruth met me at the breakfast table the next morning, already dressed and holding her car keys. "I'll drive you in," she said. "You shouldn't start this new chapter alone." Her words made me smile. The drive to the hotel was peaceful, the sun rising behind soft clouds. For the first time in weeks, I felt unafraid of what might come next. After signing for the new laptop, I returned to my office and opened the lid. The screen lit up clean and smooth, the company logo bright against the dark background. My reflection hovered faintly over it, a reminder that survival sometimes looks quiet. I set my old flash drive on the desk beside it, small but powerful proof of what had endured. By early afternoon, I'd finished setting up the new device and backed up every document twice. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and congratulations, yet even in that steady rhythm, a thought kept circling back how much had been lost before I learned to protect what I'd built. That evening, when Ruth picked me up, she handed me a brown envelope as I climbed into the car. "What's this?" I asked. "Something from your mother," she said softly. Inside was a short note written in that same looping handwriting. "I don't always understand you, but I've kept every article with your name on it." Folded beneath the note were clippings from local papers, interviews, project announcements, features I didn't know she'd seen. I stared at them until the streetlights blurred outside the window. "She's proud," Ruth said quietly. "She just can't admit it yet." That night, I placed the clippings inside a drawer in Ruth's spare room, beside the notebook of career milestones. I didn't cry, but my chest felt full in a way that wasn't entirely sadness. The realization settled slowly like dust after a storm. They could break my things, doubt my choices, and try to pull me back, but they couldn't take away the person I had become. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Ruth's kitchen table as I packed my briefcase. My phone buzzed with new messages, but I ignored them, letting the screen go dark. When I glanced out the window, I saw the ocean calm and endless. There was no anger in me, only resolve. I had found the line between love and control, and I wasn't stepping over it again. As I locked the door behind me, Ruth called out from the porch, "Don't forget they can't break what you've already rebuilt." I smiled, lifting a hand in thanks as I walked toward my car. She was right. I didn't know what the next test would be, but I was no longer afraid of being tested. The day stretched bright and clear ahead of me, but in the back of my mind I could still feel a shadow, waiting a quiet sense that my family's story with me wasn't finished. Something told me that silence never lasted long in that house, and soon I would learn exactly how far they were willing to go to pull me back. The first few weeks after the board's approval felt like breathing clean air after a long storm. The renovation project had become the talk of the hotel, and my team moved with an energy that felt contagious. Guests noticed the excitement, asking questions about what was to come, and for once I could answer with confidence. Every long night of doubt and self-defense seemed to have a purpose now. Ruth reminded me to rest, though she knew I wasn't built for slowing down when things finally started moving forward. Still, even in the middle of all that progress, I could feel the tension building quietly around the edges. My parents hadn't called since that last note from my mother, but their silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like planning. Some evenings I'd find myself checking my phone out of habit, half expecting a new accusation or a demand disguised as concern. When nothing came, I turned my attention back to the work, back to what I could control. I'd started keeping track of every payment I'd ever made toward their household electricity, water, groceries, even Tyler's insurance. What began as a way to understand the numbers soon turned into something deeper. Each row of the spreadsheet told a story of quiet obligation of years. I'd confused love with rescue. Ruth sat beside me as I tallied the totals, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "You've been supporting them since you were barely out of school," she said softly. "That's not help anymore. That's survival." I nodded the numbers on the screen, confirming what my heart already knew. By the third week, I'd found a new apartment close to the hotel, a second-floor corner unit with tall windows and a security desk downstairs. Ruth came with me to sign the lease, her steady presence making the decision feel final. "Fresh start," she said, handing me the pen. "You've earned this." Moving day was quiet, but freeing. We packed my few things into her car, and by sunset I was sitting cross-legged on my new living room floor, surrounded by unopened boxes and the hum of a refrigerator that was finally mine. I didn't bring much, just the essentials, the new laptop from work, and a few framed photos that didn't hurt to look at. That night, I began what I called my independence list. Each line was a task that cut one more tie bank accounts, automatic transfers, shared bills. One by one, I canceled them all. When the power company confirmed the account had been successfully transferred out of my name, I stared at the email for a long time, half expecting guilt to follow. It didn't. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction that settled somewhere deep, steady, and unshakable. Ruth stopped by the next morning with coffee and a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches. She looked around the bare apartment, her smile gentle. "It's a good space," she said. "Empty rooms have a way of reminding you that you get to choose what fills them." I thanked her, realizing how much those words fit more than just the furniture. As she left for her errands, I promised I'd be fine. Work became my anchor again. Nathan had assigned me to oversee the vendor contracts, and the responsibility gave me focus. My team saw me as calm and collected, unaware that every signature, every approved invoice was another way of teaching myself control after years of having none. By late afternoon, when the hotel lobby filled with the scent of coffee and polished wood, I'd catch myself feeling almost normal. But the illusion never lasted long. Late one night, as I reviewed budgets on my couch, my phone lit up with my mother's name. It had been over a month since we'd spoken. I hesitated, letting it ring twice before answering. Her voice came through thin and trembling. "Lauren, the power company called. They said the automatic payments stopped." "What's going on?" "We can't pay the bill this month." I kept my tone even. "I transferred everything out of my name. It's your account now, Mom." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Your father's been so upset. He says you've abandoned us. Everyone in the family is asking what happened." I sat back, my chest tightening. "You know what happened," I said quietly. My laptop. The things he said. She cut me off, her voice rising. He was angry. He didn't mean it. But now you're punishing us. The mill's shutting down. We're losing everything. The guilt in her tone was deliberate, practiced. Mom, I said, trying to hold the boundary I'd built. I can't keep paying your bills. I'm barely catching up on my own. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, Your father said he'd rather lose power than ask for your charity. The line went quiet after that, and before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, the silence echoing in my small apartment. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in, the urge to fix things, to transfer the money just to stop the guilt. But it passed. I turned off the phone and sat there in the dim light until the feeling faded. The next morning, Ruth found me at her kitchen table, already dressed for work, a coffee mug untouched in front of me. Rough night, she asked. I nodded. They're telling the whole family I've turned my back on them. Ruth sighed, setting down the dish towel in her hand. Let them. You can't change their story, but you can tell your own. Her words sparked something in me, a need not just to defend myself, but to document the truth. That evening, I opened my laptop and began writing. It started as a simple timeline, dates, events, and small details about every time I'd helped, every time they'd tried to pull me back. But as I wrote, the memories sharpened. Each paragraph became a record of both the harm and the resilience that followed. When I finished, it wasn't anger that filled me, but clarity. I printed the document and slipped it into a folder labeled Records. It wasn't for revenge, it was for protection. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. Ruth walked in as I was stacking papers. You look like a woman on a mission, she said with a smile. Just getting organized, I told her. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from me. You know, she said, the hardest part of all this isn't standing up for yourself. It's not apologizing when you finally do. I met her eyes and nodded. She was right. That weekend, I took one more step. I called my bank, redirected my payroll deposits to a new account, and updated my emergency contacts at work. Each small change made the ground under me feel more solid. By Sunday night, when I closed my laptop, I realized the panic that used to rise at the thought of cutting ties had been replaced by a calm I barely recognized. I stood by the window of my new apartment, looking out at the streetlights. My phone buzzed once, another message from home, but I didn't pick it up. Not yet. The story they were spreading about me would keep growing, twisting, and finding new ears. But I was finally building something stronger than their version of me. As I turned off the light, the apartment settled into quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't ache anymore. I wasn't sure what my father would try next, but I knew this much. Whatever came, I would meet it on my own terms. 2 weeks passed in a calm that didn't feel real. I woke up early, brewed coffee in the quiet, and walked to work under the soft orange glow of the streetlights. The renovation plans were moving forward, and Nathan had started including me in board meetings, something that once would have felt like a dream. Still, some part of me waited for the next tremor, the next moment when my family would reach through the silence and pull me back into their chaos. It came sooner than I expected. That Thursday morning, I was reviewing invoices when the hotel's receptionist buzzed my line. "Lauren," she said carefully, "there's a couple in the lobby asking for you. They're saying they're your parents." My chest tightened, though I kept my voice even. "I'll be right there." I hung up, stood, and took a long breath before stepping out of my office. The lobby was busy guests, checking in, the sound of suitcases rolling across tile, but I spotted them immediately. My father's hands rested flat on the counter, his jaw tight, his voice raised just enough to draw attention. My mother stood beside him, her purse clutched to her chest, her eyes darting toward the elevators. Tyler lingered behind them, shifting from foot to foot. Every step I took toward them felt heavier. "Dad," I said, keeping my tone steady, "you can't be here. This is my workplace." He turned, his face softening just enough for the performance to start. "We just wanted to see where our daughter works," he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "We're proud of you." The words hung in the air, false and bright. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling in all the practiced places. "We wanted to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner. The whole family's coming. It's been too long." The trap was clear. If I refused, I'd look cold and ungrateful. If I agreed, I'd reopen every door I'd just closed. I smiled politely, glancing toward the front desk, where my staff stood awkwardly frozen. "Now's not a good time," I said quietly. "Let's talk outside." Before I could move, Nathan appeared from across the lobby. "Mr. and Mrs. Porter," he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Nathan Cole, director here. It's nice to meet you. Lauren speaks very highly of her family." My father's eyes flickered with something sharp. "Always good to meet the man who sees her potential," he said. "We just dropped by to congratulate her." Nathan smiled the picture of professionalism, but his gaze shifted to me, reading the discomfort I was trying to hide. "Well," he said lightly, "you raised someone remarkable." My mother's eyes filled with tears on cue. "We've always tried," she said. "It's been hard since the mill announced layoffs, but family holds together, right?" Her voice broke perfectly at the word family. I saw the small crowd of onlookers forming near the seating area, their sympathetic glances aimed squarely at my parents. My father leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, but keeping it firm. "We just need a little help while things settle. That's all." The meaning wasn't lost on Nathan or me. I felt the old panic stir, the fear of public embarrassment, of losing control, but I refused to let it take hold this time. "Why don't we move this conversation somewhere private?" I said, gesturing toward a small conference room off the main hall. My father hesitated, clearly, preferring the attention of the crowd, but my mother touched his arm and nodded. As they followed me, I caught a glimpse of Ruth standing just inside the lobby doors. She held a paper bag, her expression calm, and gave me a subtle nod. I recognized our unspoken signal. She'd seen their car in the lot and come to back me up. Inside the conference room, I motioned for everyone to sit. Nathan joined us, pulling the door closed behind him. My father started first. "Lauren's been under a lot of pressure," he said. "We think the promotion's gotten to her. She stopped helping her family." He spoke as though I weren't there, his tone rehearsed. My mother clasped her hands. "We're not asking for much, just the help she's always given." Nathan looked at me. "Lauren." I opened the folder I'd brought from my office and laid out the documents I'd prepared weeks earlier, records of payments, emails, receipts, even photos of the shattered laptop. My hands didn't shake as I spoke. "These are the bills I've covered for my parents' household for the past 3 years. Utilities, insurance, groceries. And these," I said, sliding the photos forward, "show what happened the night before my first investor presentation." Nathan's expression darkened as he looked over the images. My father's confidence faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You're exaggerating," he said quickly. "That was an accident." Ruth spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. "No, it wasn't. You did the same thing to me when I got my scholarship. You've been doing this for decades, Frank. You just finally picked the wrong target." My mother's face went pale. "Ruth, don't start," she whispered. Ruth didn't back down. "She's not starting anything. She's ending it." Nathan looked up from the documents, his voice quiet but certain. "Mr. Porter, destroying company property and harassing an employee at her workplace is serious. I could contact security or even press charges on her behalf." My father's composure cracked for the first time. "You wouldn't do that," he said, his voice low. Nathan's gaze stayed steady. "I would if it meant protecting one of my best managers." The silence that followed felt heavy and final. My mother reached for her purse, her voice small. "We didn't come here to cause trouble," she said. I looked at her, seeing for the first time how much of her quiet was fear, not loyalty. "Mom," I said gently, "I love you, but this has to stop. I can't keep being the one who pays for everyone else's mistakes." She nodded once, tears slipping down her cheeks. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this," he said. Nathan stepped between us before I had to respond. "Sir, this meeting is over. I'll have security escort you out." They left the room without another word. The door closed softly behind them, and I finally exhaled. Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. "You did it," she said quietly. Nathan gathered the papers and returned them to me. "If they contact you again here," he said, "we'll handle it. You don't owe them anything." I thanked him, though the words felt small compared to what the moment meant. When I stepped back into the lobby, the crowd had dispersed. The air felt clearer, lighter somehow. Outside, the sky had turned a pale winter blue. Ruth walked beside me to the parking lot, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You stood up for yourself like I never could," she said. "Your father doesn't know what to do with that kind of strength." I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, as if something deep inside had finally clicked into place. For the first time in years, the weight wasn't on me to fix or to forgive. It was simply gone. That night, Ruth and I sat on her porch with mugs of lemonade, the air cool and quiet around us. "He won't give up easily," she said after a while. "But now he knows you're not afraid." I nodded, watching the porch light cast a soft glow on the railing. "I'm done being afraid," I said. The words came out low but sure. She smiled, tipping her mug toward mine. "Then you've already won more than you realize." The next morning, as I walked through the hotel doors, the staff greeted me with smiles and quiet nods. The world looked the same, but I didn't. And though I didn't know what would come next, I finally felt ready for it. The week after the confrontation felt strangely still. The storm I'd braced for had finally broken, but instead of wreckage, there was quiet. At work, people treated me differently, not out of pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. Nathan stopped by my office one afternoon with a small plaque in his hand. "Employee of the Quarter," he said with a faint smile. "The board was impressed by how you handled everything." For a long moment, I just stared at the gold lettering under my name, trying to connect it to the same person who'd walked into that conference room weeks ago, shaking and terrified. When I finally thanked him, it wasn't the nervous reflex of old habits, it was genuine. After the meeting, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. The certificate rested in my lap, its weight surprisingly comforting. Through the windshield, I watched the ocean beyond the parking lot, calm and blue, the tide pulling away from the rocks. I realized I hadn't felt fear in days. The kind that used to wake me up at night, making me check my phone for missed calls or messages that would send me running home to fix whatever new disaster had appeared. That instinct was fading, replaced by something steadier, something like peace. Tuesday evenings became a ritual with Ruth. We'd sit on her porch with glasses of lemonade, talking about workbooks or nothing at all. One evening, as the sun dipped behind her azaleas, she said, "You know, therapy could help you untangle some of what they did." I looked at her surprised. "You think I need it?" She smiled softly. "I think you deserve it." The following morning, I called the therapist she'd recommended. When they offered an opening for the next week, I took it without hesitation. That first session wasn't easy. The room was warm and quiet with shelves of books and soft light filtering through curtains. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Ellen Marsh, didn't push. She just asked questions that made me pause longer than I expected. "When did you first start feeling responsible for your parents' well-being?" she asked. The answer came out before I could think. "When I got my first job. Maybe before." Saying it aloud felt strange, as if pulling a thread I hadn't noticed until now. By the end of the session, I didn't feel fixed, but I felt seen. Over the next few weeks, the weight I'd carried for years began to shift. Some mornings I'd still catch myself reaching for the phone before remembering there was no crisis to handle. Other times I'd think of my father and feel both sorrow and relief. Healing, I learned, wasn't a clean break. It was a series of small permissions to live differently. At work, life continued. The renovation project entered its final phase, and Nathan asked me to oversee the regional meeting the following month. It would bring together every hotel manager within our network, a huge responsibility, but one I was finally ready for. My team responded with enthusiasm, rallying behind me with a confidence that mirrored my own. I no longer second-guessed every decision or looked over my shoulder for approval that would never come. One afternoon, as we were setting up for a site inspection, Nathan stopped by my office door. "You know," he said, "when I first hired you, I could tell you had talent. But what you've shown in the past few months, it's leadership." His words landed with quiet significance. I smiled. "Thank you," I said, and this time I didn't deflect or downplay it. When the weekend came, I visited the community center down the road, where Ruth volunteered twice a month. They were short on instructors, so I offered to teach a class on budgeting and credit basics. The room was filled with young adults just starting out their notebooks, open eyes bright with curiosity. As I explained interest rates and emergency funds, I realized how full circle it felt to be helping others avoid the kind of financial dependence that had kept my parents trapped. One of the students lingered after class to thank me. "You make it sound simple," she said. I smiled. "It just takes practice and a few boundaries." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, the quiet of my apartment wrapping around me like a blanket. The days of checking bank transfers and answering late-night calls felt like another life. The last tie I hadn't yet faced was the silence from my family. My parents hadn't contacted me since the confrontation, and part of me wondered if they ever would. Tyler had stayed quiet too. I'd stopped expecting anything different until one evening my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. It was Tyler. The message was simple: "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Coffee shop on Elm tomorrow at 4. The next day I arrived early and chose a table by the window. The smell of roasted beans filled the air as I stirred sugar into my cup, trying to steady the small pulse of nerves. Tyler arrived 10 minutes later, thinner than I remembered his expression, uncertain. "Hey," he said, sitting across from me. For a moment we just looked at each other, both unsure where to begin. "How's work?" I asked finally. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I left the mill after they shut down. Been working at Uncle Mike's garage, taking night classes too." I nodded, genuinely impressed. "That's good, Tyler. Really good." He looked down at his coffee, his voice quieter. "Dad's not doing great. The doctor says his lungs are bad. All those years at the plant." I let the words sink in, not rushing to fill the silence. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. He looked up, searching my face for something, anger, maybe, or pity, but found neither. "I didn't come to ask for money," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know, and to say I'm sorry, for the way I acted, for all of it." The sincerity in his tone caught me off guard. For a moment I saw the boy who used to follow me around the yard, asking endless questions about the world beyond our small town. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." We talked for nearly an hour. Not about our parents, those wounds were too deep, but about his classes, about what he wanted to do next. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. "Maybe we could talk again sometime." I smiled faintly. "On our terms," I said. He nodded. "On our terms." When I walked out of the cafe, the late afternoon sun hit the windows just right, casting a golden reflection across the street. I stood there for a moment, watching the light shift, realizing how different my life had become. The boundaries I'd built hadn't isolated me. They'd created space for real connection, the kind that didn't require losing myself. That night I called Ruth to tell her about the meeting. "Sounds like he's trying," she said. "Maybe he's finally learning what accountability looks like." I leaned against my kitchen counter, smiling softly. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he's just realizing he can live differently too." We talked until the sky outside faded to deep blue, the sound of her laughter filling the line. When I finally hung up, I stood by the window again, the cool glass against my palm. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something to brace for. It felt like something to build. And though I didn't know what that would look like yet, I knew one thing for certain: I would never again measure my worth by who approved of me. I was done shrinking to fit their comfort. I had found my footing, and I was standing tall. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, the phone buzzed once more. A short message from Tyler. "Thanks for listening, sis." I smiled, setting the phone aside. It was a small step, but it was a start. The quiet of the room settled around me, steady and familiar. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I slept without fear, knowing I'd already survived the hardest part. 8 months after everything changed, I stood at the front of the hotel's largest conference room, watching my team arrange chairs for the upcoming regional meeting. The sunlight poured through tall windows, catching the polished wood floors and the bright new signs that bore the hotel's logo, ones I'd helped design. It was hard to believe that just a year earlier I'd been afraid of losing everything. Now this space felt like proof of what I'd built through persistence and a quiet kind of strength. Nathan stopped by to check on the setup, his usual clipboard in hand. "Everything looks great," he said, glancing around the room. "You've turned this place into a model for the entire chain." I smiled, remembering the girl I once was, the one who second-guessed every decision and sought approval that never came. "Thank you," I said simply. I didn't need validation anymore, but it still felt good to be seen. By noon, the last of the staff had cleared out for lunch, and I walked through the empty room alone. The echo of my footsteps followed me down the corridor, soft and steady. The same rhythm seemed to fill my days. Now steady progress, quiet, confidence, no longer the frantic rush to prove my worth. For the first time, I felt like I belonged exactly where I was. After work, I drove a few blocks to the community center. On weekends, I taught a short class on financial independence, something I'd started to help others learn what had taken me years to understand. The young people who attended reminded me of myself at their age, eager, uncertain, and hoping someone would tell them it was okay to want more. Watching them take notes and ask questions filled me with a kind of peace I hadn't known before. It wasn't just about numbers or savings accounts. It was about giving them what I had once needed, a roadmap to freedom. When I got home that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Dad's been admitted to the hospital. He's stable, but they want to run more tests." I sat with the message for a long time, unsure of what to feel. There was no anger anymore, just a quiet ache, the kind that lingers when someone has shaped your life in ways you never asked for. I replied simply, "Thanks for letting me know." Then I called Ruth. "Go if you need to," she said. "Not for him, for you. Sometimes closure comes from showing up not to forgive, but to understand." Her voice was calm, practical, the same as it had been during every storm of my life. That night, I packed an overnight bag and drove to the hospital just before visiting hours ended. When I walked into the room, my mother sat by the window, her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, worn down by years of worry. My father was asleep, an oxygen tube tracing across his face. The sound of the monitor filled the silence between us. "He's been asking about you," my mother said softly. "He won't say it, but he's proud." I didn't answer right away. I just sat down in the chair beside her and looked at the man who had once destroyed everything I'd worked for, now lying still and fragile. After a long pause, I said, "I hope he finds peace with all of it." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We all made mistakes," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to stop him." For the first time, I believed her. The years of silence between us weren't erased, but they softened. We talked quietly until the nurse came in, adjusting the lights and reminding us that visiting hours were ending. Before I left, I rested my hand briefly on my father's arm. He didn't wake, but that was okay. Some words don't need to be said out loud. Driving home that night, the road felt different. The weight of the past wasn't pressing down on me anymore. It was behind me where it belonged. By the time I reached my apartment, the moon was high and the world felt still. Ruth was waiting on my porch, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. "You went," she said. I nodded. And I thought for a moment, I think I finally let go. We sat outside together, the night air cool and quiet. Ruth smiled faintly, watching the stars. "You've built a life that stands on its own," she said. "That's the real victory." I looked out at the dark horizon, the hotel lights faint in the distance, and felt the truth of her words settle deep inside me. Freedom wasn't about distance, it was about peace. A few days later, I received an envelope at work, addressed in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single note. "Thank you for coming. Your father passed peacefully this morning." There was no request, no guilt, just a sentence full of finality. I closed the envelope carefully and set it aside. Later, I walked down to the beach, kicked off my shoes, and let the cold water lap at my feet. The sky stretched wide and pale above me, the waves soft against the sand. It wasn't grief I felt, not exactly, more like release. The ending I once feared had turned into quiet acceptance. Back at home, I placed the note in a small box with the certificate Nathan had given me and a photo of Ruth and me from the hotel's reopening. Together, they told the story of how I'd learned to stand tall, even when everything tried to break me. Now, every morning before work, I take a few minutes to write in a small journal. Ruth gave me a gratitude list. Some days, it's as simple as a good cup of coffee or the ocean breeze through my window. Other days, it's bigger, like knowing I can trust myself. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: I'll never again trade my peace for someone else's comfort. I've learned that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands beside you when you choose to rise. If you've ever had to rebuild after someone tried to tear you down, know that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments, quiet, steady, and real. And if this story found you tonight, take a deep breath, hold your ground, and remember you deserve the life you build with your own hands. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that strength can be soft and that peace once earned is worth protecting.